The morning I vanished was the most ordinary Tuesday of all time. That was the beauty of it. James kissed me goodbye as usual, his hand lingering possessively on my hip. "Don't forget, dinner with the Wilsons tonight at 7, he reminded me, checking my expression to make sure I understood this wasn't a suggestion. "Wear the blue dress I bought you last month, and maybe those pearl earrings from our anniversary." I nodded, eyes downcast. "Of course, honey. I'll be ready." My voice is practiced, perfect, placating. "And Ellie?" He paused at the door, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Your phone was in the bathroom this morning. You know I don't like that." Not a question. A warning. "Sorry. Won't happen again," I whispered, the door closed. I counted to 100. Then I picked up my coffee cup, walked to the sink, and poured it out, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain. 7 years of my life, disappearing just like that coffee. I calmly walked to our bedroom closet, slid aside the panel I'd loosened months ago, and pulled out the pre-packed duffel bag. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. The time for fear had passed 3 weeks ago when I'd made my decision. By 9:30 a.m., I no longer existed in James Sullivan's perfectly controlled world. No note. No confrontation. No dramatic exit. I simply wasn't there anymore, and that's how you disappear from a marriage designed to suffocate you, one calculated, meticulous step at a time. My story doesn't start with bruises or broken bones. I wish it had. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying physical abuse would have been better. But at least then, I might have recognized what was happening sooner. Instead, my prison was built so gradually, so perfectly disguised as love and protection, that by the time I realized I was trapped, the walls were already too high to see over. 7 years ago, I was Eleanor Chin, 26, ambitious marketing coordinator with friends who called me the planner because I always knew exactly where my life was heading. I had a 5-year career roadmap pinned above my desk, a growing 401k, and weekend brunches with my college roommates where we'd laugh until mimosa came out our noses. That woman seems like a stranger to me now. I met James at an industry conference. He was charismatic, successful, and 12 years older, the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. When he focused that attention on me, it felt like standing in a spotlight I never knew I craved. "You're different," he told me on our 3rd date, tucking my hair behind my ear. Most women these days don't understand the value of partnership, of building something lasting together. I melted at his words, interpreting them as appreciation rather than what they were, the first blueprint for my reconstruction. The changes came so subtly. James suggested I wear my hair down because he loved how it framed my face. He bought me a beautiful watch after noticing mine was a bit juvenile for someone of your caliber. He pointed out that my friends seemed immature and draining. "I just hate seeing them take advantage of your generosity." Each suggestion felt like care, like being truly seen by someone who wanted the best for me. Who was I to argue when this successful, worldly man saw potential in me that I hadn't recognized myself? When he proposed after 8 months, my friends raised eyebrows at the speed. But I was certain, this was a man who knew what he wanted and went after it. Decisive. Assured. Everything I aspired to be. "He's just so intense about you," my best friend Mia commented at my bachelorette party, the concern in her voice barely concealed. "He adores me," I corrected her, annoyed that she couldn't see what I saw. I didn't realize then that what she described as intensity would eventually feel like standing directly in the beam of a searchlight, unable to move without detection. The isolation happened in stages so incremental that each one seemed reasonable. First came the move, a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood 45 minutes from the city. "We'll have space to grow our family," James reasoned. "And your commute? We'll figure it out. Maybe it's time to consider a position that doesn't demand so much of you anyway." Then came the joint accounts. "We're partners now, Ellie. What's mine is yours. Don't you trust me? My promotion opportunity, do you really want the stress? And all those business trips would put such a strain on us. My weekly dinners with girlfriends, again? Didn't you just see them? I was hoping we could focus on us this weekend. The home office I'd set up, honey, I need to concentrate. Would you mind working at the kitchen table instead? My calls are more important for our future. By our second anniversary, I was working remotely in a diminished role, had seen Mia exactly twice in the past year, and found myself texting James if I was going to be more than 20 minutes later than expected getting home from anywhere. Not because he demanded it explicitly, but because the questions that would follow if I didn't weren't worth the exhaustion. I was worried. Who were you with? Why didn't you think to let me know? Is consideration too much to ask? Each question designed to make me feel selfish for causing concern, for not prioritizing his peace of mind, and still, I didn't see it. Or perhaps more accurately, I didn't want to see it. Because admitting what was happening meant acknowledging that I, educated, independent Eleanor, had somehow become a woman who sought permission for the basic rhythms of her own life. The wake-up call wasn't dramatic. There was no singular moment of clarity, no shocking reveal of hidden darkness. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost identical to the Tuesday I would eventually choose to leave. I was sitting at that kitchen table, staring at my laptop, trying to summon enthusiasm for a project that once would have excited me. My phone buzzed with a text from James, picked up dinner. Be home in 20. Wear the green top I like. Such a simple message. Nothing overtly controlling or cruel. Just a man telling his wife what to wear for dinner in their own home. Started to rise automatically, to change from my comfortable sweater into the top he preferred, when something inside me finally stopped, sat back down, a strange feeling washing over me, like watching myself from above, seeing the patterns that had been invisible when I was lost in them. How many decisions did I make each day that were actually mine? What would happen if I simply didn't change my top? If I wore what I wanted? If I disagreed with his dinner choice? If I went out with friends without justifying every minute away? The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. That night, I wore my sweater to dinner. A small rebellion, ridiculous, really, in the grand scheme of things, James noticed immediately. I thought I asked you to wear the green top. Not angry. Disappointed. Confused by this deviation from the script. I'm comfortable in this, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, steadied me for a long moment, then smiled, that particular smile that never reached his eyes. You don't look your best in that, sweetheart. But if you're having a rough day, I understand. And there it was, the redirect, the subtle undermining, the implication that only discomfort or distress would lead me to assert my own preference. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, he came up behind me in the bathroom, hands encircling my waist. You know I only want you to shine, don't you? He murmured against my neck. Sometimes I think I see your potential more clearly than you do yourself. I met my own eyes in the mirror as he spoke, and for the first time in years, I really looked at the woman staring back at me. Her eyes held a question: how much more of yourself are you willing to lose? That night, lying awake beside him, I made a decision. Not to leave, not yet. But to start paying attention. To start keeping score. Once I began looking for the patterns, they were impossible to miss. Keeping score became my secret project, my private rebellion. Created a notes app on my phone titled Grocery Lists and documented everything. How many times James checked my location through our shared account, how often he criticized my appearance under the guise of helping, how he'd interrupt when I spoke to friends, the way he'd question every purchase I made while freely spending on himself. I noted how he'd casually mention my sensitivity or overreaction when I expressed any displeasure. How he'd rewrite our arguments in the retelling, making me doubt my own memory, and I began to notice the financial control, tighter than I'd realized. Though we had joint accounts on paper, James managed everything. My paychecks went directly into accounts he oversaw. He gave me a credit card for household expenses but reviewed every charge, questioning anything unfamiliar. Just being fiscally responsible, he'd say with that patient smile when I bristled at the interrogations. One of us needs to think about our future. But the most chilling pattern was the isolation. I hadn't spoken to my parents in months, our conversations had dwindled after James repeatedly pointed out how they stressed me out or didn't respect our boundaries. My circle of friends had shrunk to acquaintances who passed James's approval, mostly couples he worked with, people who saw him as charming and considered me lucky. 3 months into my covert documentation, I had my answer. This wasn't love. This was control, methodically executed and disguised as protection. The question then became, what was I going to do about it? I wish I could say I confronted him, that I stood tall and demanded my freedom in some cinematic moment of empowerment. But I knew better. I'd watched James destroy business competitors with surgical precision. I'd seen how he responded to even minor challenges to his authority. And most importantly, I knew the statistics about the most dangerous time for women in controlling relationships. The moment they try to leave. So instead, I became a secret agent in my own life. Operation Freedom began on an ordinary Thursday when James mentioned an upcoming business trip, 3 days in Chicago the following month. I'll miss you, I said, playing my part perfectly. Maybe I could come along? Make a little vacation of it? He kissed my forehead, pleased by my apparent dependence. Not this time, sweetheart. All business. But I appreciate how much you hate being away from me. Those 3 days would be my window. The planning consumed me, gave me purpose I hadn't felt in years. Each small step had to be untraceable, each detail considered. First came the money. I needed funds James couldn't track or access. I began skimming small amounts from grocery shopping, buying store brands instead of name brands and pocketing the difference, claiming certain items cost more than they did, purchasing gift cards a few dollars at a time and hiding them inside an old tampon box. The one place I knew James would never look. Slowly, painfully slowly, I built a cash reserve. Next came the documentation. During a rare afternoon alone, I photographed our marriage certificate, birth certificate, social security card, and insurance information. I uploaded everything to a new email account James knew nothing about, then returned everything exactly as I'd found it. The hardest part was finding somewhere to go. I couldn't risk contacting old friends. James occasionally checked my phone, and any unusual calls would raise suspicion. Eventually, I found a solution while volunteering at a community center James had approved of, because it looked good for his image and conveniently kept me occupied with activities he deemed appropriate. There I met Sarah, a social worker who coordinated domestic violence resources. One day, while James was in a meeting, I worked up the courage to approach her. I have a friend, I began awkwardly. She needs to leave her husband. But she's afraid and doesn't know where to start. Sarah didn't ask questions. She just handed me a brochure for a women's resource center 2 towns over. Your friend can call this number. They don't need her real name, and they can help with temporary housing until she figures out next steps. I memorized the number, then destroyed the brochure before leaving the center. Over the following weeks, I made preparations in microscopic increments. A burner phone purchased with cash and hidden in the lining of an old purse in the attic. A small bag packed with essentials, concealed behind the false panel in our closet that James never noticed. He'd insisted on renovating the bedroom closets the year before, and I'd paid careful attention to how the contractors built the panels. I set up a new bank account using the community center's computer during lunch breaks, having mail sent to a P.O. box I rented under a variation of my maiden name. Each night, I laid beside James, feeling his arm draped possessively across my waist, and mentally reviewed my checklist. The cash. The documentation. The escape route. The timing, the life that waited on the other side of fear. The 3 days of James's Chicago trip approached, and with them, a growing sense of both terror and anticipation. I had exactly $3,472 in cash, a prepaid phone, a bag with 5 days' worth of clothes, and a reservation at a women's shelter 60 miles away. Made through a carefully placed call from the burner phone. Everything was set. I just needed to wait for James to leave. 2 days before his trip, disaster struck. Change of plans, he announced over dinner, watching my face carefully. Henderson can handle the Chicago meetings. I think I'll stay home, maybe take a couple days off. We could use some quality time, don't you think? My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Every muscle in my body tensed, though I forced my expression to remain neutral. Oh. That's surprising. I thought this trip was important. Not as important as us, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. His thumb caressed my wrist, right over my pulse point. Could he feel it racing? You've seemed distracted lately. I think we need to reconnect. In that moment, I knew. He suspected something. Perhaps not my specific plan, but he sensed the psychological distance I'd created. And like a predator sensing prey about to flee, he was closing in. That sounds nice, I lied, squeezing his hand while my mind raced through contingency plans that night. As James showered, I made a frantic call from my burner phone to the shelter, explaining I needed to delay. The kind woman on the other end assured me their door would be open whenever I needed it. Back to waiting. Back to pretending. But now with the terrifying awareness that James was watching more closely than ever, the quality time he planned turned out to be 3 days of intense togetherness. Breakfast he prepared, controlling my movements in the morning. Surprise lunch deliveries to be sure I was home when expected, elaborate dinners followed by pointed conversations about our future. I've been thinking, he said on the third night, swirling expensive whiskey in a crystal glass. You don't seem fulfilled with your current work situation. Maybe you should consider leaving that job altogether. We certainly don't need the money, and I hate seeing you stressed about deadlines. Translation: I want to cut off your last remaining tie to independence. Really? I kept my tone curious, non-confrontational. But you know I've always valued having my own career. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Just a suggestion. Though I've noticed how tense you get checking your work emails. A woman like you deserves to focus on what truly matters. The subtext was clear. What truly mattered was him. His needs. His comfort. His control. I needed a new plan. And fast. 2 more weeks passed in this heightened state of surveillance. James suddenly working from home more often. Surprising me with lunch. Checking in via text more frequently. Suggesting I invite that friend from the community center over for dinner, testing whether this person I'd mentioned actually existed. Began to feel like I was suffocating, the walls closing in further with each passing day. But desperation makes for creative thinking. The opportunity came from an unexpected source, James himself. The San Diego client wants an in-person presentation, he mentioned one evening. Can't be helped. Looks like I'll be gone overnight after all. Just one night, though. One night. 24 hours at most. A much tighter window than my original plan, but it would have to do. When? I asked, careful to sound merely curious. Tuesday. Flight leaves at 7 a.m., back Wednesday evening. 5 days away. Not ideal, but it was my only chance. I'd have to modify my plan significantly. The countdown to Tuesday felt like waiting for execution and salvation simultaneously. I revised my packing plan, only absolute essentials now. I couldn't take the full duffel bag I'd prepared. There simply wouldn't be time to get it from the hiding place and still make a clean escape before James might check my location or call. Instead, I gradually moved small items to my work tote over the days leading up to Tuesday. A change of clothes layered at the bottom, basic toiletries disguised among my normal work supplies, my cash divided into several envelopes hidden throughout the bag. Monday night was the hardest performance of my life. Making dinner as usual. Discussing mundane topics. Smiling at his jokes. Even responding to his physical advances, the thought of refusal creating too much risk of raising suspicion at the 11th hour. As he fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing every step of tomorrow's plan. The timing would be precise. The margin for error, non-existent. Didn't sleep a single minute that night. Tuesday morning arrived with painful slowness. I rose before the alarm, prepared James's favorite breakfast, kissed him goodbye at the door with practiced wifely concern. Text me when you land, I said, straightening his tie. Always do. He cupped my face in his hands. I'll be checking in, so keep your phone close. A warning disguised as affection, watched from the window as his car disappeared down our tree-lined street. And then I began counting. 1 hour. I went through my normal morning routine in case neighbors noticed anything unusual. 2 hours. I sent an email to my supervisor claiming a family emergency would keep me out of work for several days. 3 hours. I received James's text confirming his landing in San Diego. I responded appropriately, then disabled all location services on my phone. 4 hours. I retrieved my emergency documents from their hiding place, placed them in my work tote, and added the burner phone. 5 hours. I walked to the bus stop 6 blocks from our house, paid cash for a ticket to the neighboring town, and never looked back. The chain of transportation I'd planned was deliberately convoluted. Bus to the next town. Taxi, paid in cash, to a shopping center. Another bus to the opposite side of the city. A third bus to the town where the women's shelter waited. By 3 p.m., I was checking in with the shelter staff, giving them only my first name and a brief explanation. My husband monitors everything. He'll be looking for me by tonight. They didn't press for details, just showed me to a sparse but clean room with a single bed and a small dresser. The bathroom is shared, the staff member explained. Dinner's at 6. We have security protocols in place, no one gets in without clearance. I sat on the edge of the bed after she left, my body suddenly acknowledging the exhaustion my mind had been fighting. For the first time in years, I didn't need to perform, didn't need to calculate my expressions or responses. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. I was free, and somewhere across the country, my phone, which I'd mailed to a bus station in the opposite direction before arriving at the shelter, was about to start ringing incessantly. The first 48 hours of freedom were the most surreal of my life. I slept in bursts, startling awake at the smallest sounds, certain somehow that James had found me. I jumped at shadows, constantly looked over my shoulder, and struggled to make basic decisions without anticipating someone else's reaction. Meanwhile, I knew a storm was brewing in my absence. I could picture it perfectly, James returning home to an empty house. Calling my phone repeatedly. Growing increasingly frantic, then furious, as he realized I wasn't responding. Checking our bank accounts, credit cards, calling hospitals, perhaps even friends or colleagues. What would the story be? That his wife was missing? Had there been an accident? Or would he immediately know this was intentional? One of the shelter counselors, Rita, helped me process these thoughts during daily check-ins. Your body's still in survival mode, she explained gently. And your mind is still trying to predict his reactions because that's been your safety mechanism for years. It will take time to unlearn those patterns. On my third day at the shelter, Rita helped me create a more sustainable plan. We discussed options, different cities where I could rebuild, job possibilities, legal considerations. You need a restraining order, she advised. And eventually, divorce papers. But first, we need to ensure you're established somewhere safe, with resources and support. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical steps forward. With the shelter's help, I found temporary work paid in cash. I began researching cities far from our home, places where James had no connections. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in domestic situations like mine, learning my options for protecting myself legally, all while knowing that somewhere, James was looking for me. The thought simultaneously terrified and strengthened my resolve. 6 weeks after my escape, I was sitting in a small apartment in a city thousands of miles from my former home. The place was sparsely furnished, just basics acquired from thrift shops and discount stores, but it was mine. Rent paid in my name, with a job that would sustain me while I rebuilt my career step by step, changed my appearance, cut my long hair into a practical bob, dyed it darker, adopted glasses instead of the contact lenses James had preferred. Small changes, but enough to create hesitation in anyone glancing at an old photo. My new phone rang. One of only 3 people had this number. Ellie? It's David. The lawyer who'd been handling my case from afar. I have news. I gripped the phone tighter. Good or bad? Both, potentially. James filed a missing persons report, as expected. Police did a welfare check based on your email explaining you left voluntarily. They're satisfied you aren't in danger, but what? He's making noise online. Social media posts about his mentally unstable wife who disappeared. Suggesting you might be a danger to yourself. Playing the worried husband angle hard. My stomach nodded. Classic James, controlling the narrative, positioning himself as the victim, laying groundwork to discredit anything I might say. Has he hired anyone? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Private investigators weren't bound by the same constraints as police. Not that we can determine. But Ellie, he's liquidating assets. Selling property you jointly owned. Moving money around. You need to file the divorce papers before he burns through everything. The thought of any contact, even through lawyers, made my hands shake. But David was right. I couldn't hide forever, and I deserved my share of what we'd built, what I'd sacrificed 7 years of my life for. Okay, I said finally. Draw them up. The legal process dragged on for months. James fought every petition, contested every claim, delayed every hearing. Classic tactics to maintain some form of control, to keep me tethered to him through bureaucracy if nothing else, remained in hiding. My location known only to my lawyer and 2 trusted friends who had reconnected with me after extensive vetting to ensure they hadn't maintained contact with James. The Mia, my once best friend whom James had systematically separated me from, cried when we finally spoke by phone. I knew something was wrong, she said, her voice breaking. The way you slowly disappeared from your own life. But every time I tried to reach out, he was there, answering your texts, making excuses for why you couldn't talk. Eventually, I convinced myself maybe you really did want distance. I'm sorry, I whispered, though I knew the isolation hadn't been my fault. Don't you dare apologize, she fired back. Just tell me you're safe now. Slowly, painfully, I was rebuilding. A job in marketing again, entry-level compared to where I'd been before James, but with a company that valued my ideas. A small circle of new friends who knew nothing of my past. A therapist who specialized in coercive control, helping me recognize and counter the thought patterns James had installed in my mind. Still, I jumped when my phone rang unexpectedly. Still checked over my shoulder when walking home. Still woke sometimes in cold sweats, certain I'd heard his voice calling my name. 9 months after my escape, the divorce was finalized. Thanks to my documentation and a judge who recognized the patterns of financial control, I received a fair settlement, not everything I deserved, but enough to truly start over. The day the papers came through, I sat in my apartment, staring at the legal document that officially severed the last tie between us. I should have felt only relief, but the emotions were more complex: grief for the person I'd been before him, for the years lost, for the dreams that had twisted into a gilded cage. That night, I did something I hadn't dared since leaving. I created a new email address and sent a single message to James's personal account: I'm free now. Not just legally, I'm free of the fear. Free of the constant calculations of how to exist without triggering your disapproval. Free of measuring my worth through your assessment. I want nothing more from you, not explanations, not apologies, not contact of any kind. Consider this goodbye.p.s. I never did like that blue dress. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't want one. The message wasn't really for him anyway. It was for me. The final period at the end of a chapter 1 was ready to close. 2 years have passed since the Tuesday morning I disappeared from James Sullivan's life. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, other times, the memories are so vivid they steal my breath. Won't pretend recovery has been linear. There are still days when I hear his voice in my head questioning my choices. Still moments when I catch myself seeking permission that no one is demanding I obtain. Still nights when I dream of being trapped in that beautiful house with its invisible bars, but those days grow fewer. Those moments, briefer. Those nights, less frequent, I've learned that freedom isn't just the absence of control, it's the presence of choice. The simple luxury of deciding what to wear without calculating someone else's reaction. The joy of spending time with friends without watching the clock in fear. The peace of falling asleep without rehearsing the right things to say tomorrow. My therapist says I should be proud of my journey, and increasingly, I am. Not just of the escape, though that required courage I didn't know I possessed, but of the rebuilding. Of recognizing my worth independent of anyone else's assessment. Of learning to trust my own perceptions again. Last month, I received a promotion at work. The celebration dinner with friends afterwards stretched late into the evening, filled with laughter and conversation that flowed without tension. Walking home under streetlights, I realized I hadn't checked the time once, hadn't worried about explaining my whereabouts to anyone. Such a small freedom. Such an enormous gift. I still don't use social media, too risky, too many ways to be found. But I've reclaimed my connections to family, to old friends who understood why I disappeared and welcomed me back without judgment. I've even begun cautiously dating again, though I take things very slowly, hyper-attuned to any echo of control disguised as care. Sometimes I wonder if James still looks for me. If he's replaced me with someone new who doesn't yet recognize the warning signs. I hope not, but I can't save everyone. It took everything I had just to save myself. What I know for certain is this: I am Eleanor Chin again. Not Ellie. That diminutive belongs to a woman who made herself smaller to accommodate someone else's need for dominance. Eleanor. Full name, full self, full voice. The woman who disappeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning, only to finally, truly be found. If you're listening to this and something in my story resonates with you, please know you're not alone. Control and coercion often hide behind the mask of love and protection. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And remember that you deserve freedom, even if the path to it seems impossible from where you stand. For those fortunate enough to have never experienced this kind of relationship, I ask only that you listen without judgment when someone trusts you with their truth. The most dangerous prison is the one others can't see. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found value in it, please share it with someone who might need to hear these words. And if you'd like to hear more stories of survival and rebuilding, subscribe to this channel, because sometimes, the most powerful words in the English language are the simplest. I believe you.